And welcome to the Runnin with the Herd podcast, powered up by Herd Nation, a part of the Rivals Network, and sponsored by Mike Gwynn Insurance Agency. I'm your host and the producer of the Runnin with the Herd podcast, Aaron Coleman, alongside my co-host, Josh Stowers. Josh, welcome, man.
What's going, buddy?
Not too much, man. Just coming off of a Herd win over App State. Big win. Braylon Braxton coming in as the quarterback for Gimpy Stone Earl, and Braylon accounted for 5 touchdowns. Obviously, the defense coming in with some big plays. They obviously gave up 31 points, but they came up with a couple of timely interceptions. Reese Veerhoff kicked a couple of field goals. So it was a very complimentary game in all facets, but we turn the page now to the Georgia Southern Eagles. So first, before we get into our guest there, Josh, what were some of your takeaways from the homecoming win over App State?
Well, first of all, you're 1-0 in conference. Obviously that's a huge piece. That's the ultimate goal, is just to be 1-0 every week when you get into conference play. Second of all, I thought the day itself was actually great. The weather was great. We had a good crowd. You had the celebrity guest was there. That was really cool.
Yeah.
It was just a really great day. And then, as far as that was all off the field. And when you look at the on the field, production, hard to beat day, really. And we played really well. Played a fairly clean game. Penalties, turnovers, were very limited. Braylon obviously performed really well in his debut. We ran the ball well as a team. Just a really well played game, like you said. All the way around. Obviously defensively we gave up some yards and gave up some points, but you'll have that. In games when like for us, we scored. He scored off the interception return. He scored off Jordan Houston's one play, touchdown reception. So anytime you do things like that, you're giving the other team more possessions, and that just gives them more chance for more yards and more points and so on and so forth. So, and to be honest, that game was really never in question. I mean, after they're somewhere in the second quarter, we went up 3 scores. That game never felt like it was like they were a threat. That's just how I felt, anyways. So it was a really good game. I like the game plan offensively. Obviously we highlighted Braxton's, feet, and he threw the ball effectively when we did throw it. Obviously, like me and you were just talking a second ago, the best ball he threw all day was a drop, but he did well. I think when you look at things, in totality, I don't think the day could have went much better for the Herd.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it was a good sign to me, because when you look at, the 2 quarterbacks that we have primarily starting, when you talk about Stone Earl, who started the first few games, and then you have Braylon Braxton, who started last week. Obviously, 2 kind of different styles, but 2 efficient quarterbacks. Doing it with both their arm and their feet. And if those 2 guys could just stick to what they're doing, not turn the ball over, play efficient football, we'll be in every ball game that we play. Now, with that said, there are some things that could be cleaned up from that game. Obviously, the defense giving up 31 points. Obviously, you don't want to give up those kinds of points. We talked a little bit off the air. Aguilar is probably one of the better quarterbacks that we'll see all year, and he's somebody to look out for. Now, we're turning the page to a team that, when you look at them, they're pretty good themselves. They have an efficient quarterback too. They're playing at home. They're playing in front of their fans. They're playing coming off of a bye week. And, it's something that if we go out there and play our game, it could be our game. We could win it. It's definitely a game that I see being a very tough, balanced, competitive game, just like the previous 2 were, both in Statesboro and in Huntington last year for the 75 game. But I tell you what, it's just one of those where Josh, I mean, you can't get too big headed over a win over App State because right now App State's not playing very well. But at the same time, I mean, yes, it's good to have that momentum and that confidence, but you can't get overconfident because you could easily lose because there are no guaranteed wins the rest of the way out.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I think the biggest thing is just to be 1-0. I mean, like, when it comes to conference play, that's all that matters, just to win one each week. And, whether you win by, you know, 25 or win by 15 or one, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, the goal is to be 1-0. And, you know, going on the road in conference is different than playing on the road in general. I don't know what it is about it, but it just seems like there's, I guess, maybe more familiarity, and which is one thing. But like, the portal kind of breeds now is, teams can't be so familiar with who they're playing, which is a really weird dynamic. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's like you and I were just talking there off there a second ago. Teams can kind of reinvent themselves, year to year, and we've done that a little bit. Um, Georgia Southern, just on looking at, taking a quick look at their depth chart, they haven't done that as much. Their quarterback is, a second year guy. They, their best defensive players. I mean, he's been there for a while. The running backs have been
Mhm.
there. So, they haven't done that as much as, probably we have. I mean, obviously, we've played two quarterbacks, and those guys are both portal guys. And, the receiver room was kind of retooled, and our offensive line was retooled, and so on and so forth. But, like I said, just be 1-0, go out, like you said, play a clean game. And I really like where we're at in terms of, you know, or where we could be at, if we do that. Try to play penalty free football. Try to protect the ball and see where things end up on Saturday night.
All right. And looks like we're going to be joined here just a little bit by Danny Reed, the play-by-play voice of the Georgia Southern Eagles, and it looks like he's ready to go. So let's bring him in. The play-by-play voice of the Georgia Southern Eagles football team, Danny Reed, here joining us in the Running with the Herd podcast. Danny, welcome.
Guys, I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to the talk.
Yeah, definitely. And Georgia Southern's coming off of a bye week this year. And like Josh and I talked about, they're playing pretty much mistake free football on the offensive side of the ball. French has only thrown one interception, but thrown 7 touchdowns this year. Talk to us a little bit about Clay Helton's group offensively and just what they're looking to do and just a little bit about the efficiency of JC French.
Yeah, that was one thing that getting ready for this game, I realized how similar the teams were with two games against teams that you'd probably say are above your weight class, beating an FCS, beating a like team, and then winning your conference opener. But you've also got two teams that so far are protecting the football a lot better than they did a year ago, considering that in 2023, these two teams were bottom five nationally in turnovers committed. And that was a huge emphasis in the offseason. And it was compounded with the fact that you knew that Davis Brin was done, so you had a three-way quarterback battle to see who was going to lead this offense. New offensive coordinator as well with Ryan Applin. It was going to be J.C. French. It was going to be Dexter Williams. It was going to be David Dallas. If you came to any of the live scrimmages, you probably thought that David Dallas was going to win the job. But in practice, simply because of his ability to protect the football, that's why J.C. French earned this position. Coach Helton has said a couple of times he was averaging one turnover every 150 snaps, which is an insane number considering how much trouble the Eagles had with that last year. But he has been even better than advertised. He had that great individual game against Boise State, a game that the Eagles got down by 19. They came back and took the lead. They had it in the fourth quarter. But as we've seen, Ashton Genty is a monster. I think he's the Heisman Trophy frontrunner at this moment. I hope he continues to have the season he is because he's bordering on history. But just to watch JC command the offense, not put the ball in tough spots, he's using his weapons. He's had at least 8 receivers in all 5 games, and he's also incorporating the running backs. The running backs have 22 catches combined through these first 5 games. So it's been protecting the football, but also been able to feature all those weapons, and he's been able to trust that offensive line. Yeah, there have been a couple of games where the sacks have been high, giving up 6 over the last 2 weeks, but you're playing an Ole Miss team who's got maybe the best defensive line in the country. Georgia State is known for its pass rush. Kevin Swin is one of the better pass rushers in the league. And Boise State they just do everything well. But I still think that this team discovered a lot about themselves against Georgia State, especially offensively, especially because they could run the ball, and that makes French's ability to protect the football in the passing game that much more important.
And Danny, one of the things that stood out to me was, like you said, just how efficient he was. But the two backs, Jalen and the other one's name eludes me, but both those guys have 200 plus yards rushing, and it looks like Jalen's more of maybe like a workhorse type. I mean, he's got quite a few more carries than the backup, but the backup has, he's averaging like nearly 7 yards a carry. So it looks like he maybe is more of like a big play type guy, or at least has home run potential. Just talk about them.
It'd be easy to say that one's thunder and one's lightning, but I think that might be a little bit disrespectful to both in a couple of different ways. Jalen's every bit of 225. Pro Football Focus rates him as the number one offensive prospect in this league, and it was a really slow start. He'd been dealing with a little bit of an injury, but Georgia State was by far the most healthy he's been. He carried it 22 times, had his 10th career 100-yard game. He has that speed that you wouldn't expect for someone that is built like him, as solid as can be. He's going to get your tough yards. He's a great tackle breaker. But the fact that he was able to get back to health after a couple of tough games show you that mentally he was where he needed to be. And then with O.J. Arnold to complement him, a little bit smaller but can run with power. He's more known for the speed and also for catching the ball out of the backfield. He's caught nearly as many passes this year as he did all of last year. And don't shortchange David Bedenga, who's all of 5'7". He's the fastest of the three. He might get a couple of series a game, but he can do the things that those other two may not necessarily feature. He can hide himself amongst the offensive line. He can catch the ball two out of the backfield. Jalen is definitely the workhorse. He had the terrific game against Marshall 2 years ago before he got hurt during that contest and then missed the rest of the season. And I know that after as well as he and the rest of that offense played against Georgia State, they want to make sure they back it up instead of just saying that, oh, that was a really good day instead of the start of something.
Certainly. Danny Reed here, our guest in the Running with the Herd podcast, powered up by Herd Nation, part of the Rivals Network, sponsored by Mike Gwynn Insurance Agency. We are streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and X. So if you have a question, comment, or anything for Danny, Josh, or myself, feel free to do so. We're streaming live on all three of those platforms. So thank you to everybody on those platforms for joining us here tonight. And when you talk a little bit about the offensive line, Danny, I mean, obviously they've given up a few sacks here and there that you mentioned it. I mean, obviously Ole Miss is Ole Miss. And, there's a lot of different things that Boise State does defensively as well. But just talk a little bit about that group up front.
When you lose a guy like Brian Miller last year, who was a seventh-year senior, and a guy like a Khalil Crowder, who was a three-time All-League pick and was a sixth-year senior, that's 13 years of experience from your offensive line taken up by two guys. So not a whole lot that they didn't see. And when you bring in your fifth offensive line coach in 5 years in Zach Langford, somebody that's worked with Coach Applin previously at Western Kentucky and knows this scheme, a great relationship with the Helton family, there is a sense of when will it click? First couple of games, it was very touch and go, even though it is a good group up front and probably as solid of a group as Georgia Southern has had in a couple of years with Chandler Strong, the freshman All-American from last year at center. He had missed the previous few games. He made his return last week. So now you've got him and Chance Carroll that can both step in and give you a lot of reps at center. On the inside with Pishon Wembley and Caleb Cook as your guards. Wembley has started every game of his 2+ year career. No Eagle offensive lineman has done that to start a career in about 2 decades. And then at your tackles, Dom Boyd was somebody that came in during the spring after the Eagles had a need at tackle. They had a couple of guys graduate, a couple more go in the portal, so they needed somebody to step in on the left side. He's been really good. He's an NFL prospect. He could play guard or tackle at the next level, I think. And then with Bryson Broadway on the other side, he's got experience in this league, having played at Georgia State, was also an FCS guy at Eastern Illinois, but he's done a solid job at right tackle. Kalen Williams is a 6'7" guy from Dublin, about an hour and a half away from Statesboro, that's had to start a game when Dom was injured. they can go about 6 or 7 deep up front with Weston Wallace able to play either of the guard positions. But now that is a stable group because of all those reps that they've logged. And from anybody you talk to on that offensive staff, they believe that Zach Langford is a brilliant mind, not just with an offensive line, but with an offensive scheme as a whole. Just knows how to get his guys ready. They're well prepared, and they're playing well together. Last weekend against Georgia State, when you go for 261 on the ground and you complement that with a controlled passing game, staying on the field on third downs, you're going to give up your sacks because of all the plays you're running. Even if you run the football more, you're going to be susceptible to sacks, especially when this league has so many great pass rushers, even though the personnel changes so much from year to year. I think you've got to take that with a grain of salt. But the fact that those guys blocked as well as they did to give the Eagles 200-yard rushers to go for 261 against a team that's known for being physical up front, I think that was the start of something for that group, and it was really nice to see because of how much work they put in.
Danny, you mentioned Applin and the new system and the scheme. For anyone who hasn't watched Georgia Southern play this year, kind of comment about what we can expect offensively.
Guys, it's a lot like what you're doing with the air raid. And I think that people, I talked with Steve Cotton earlier today, everybody thinks that when they hear air raid, it's throw the ball 60 yards downfield, throw the ball 60 times per game. But the air raid philosophy is more of presenting the potential to do that by opening up the field with 4 and 5 wide receivers and getting light boxes when you've got running backs that are as talented as Jalen White and O.J. Arnold, or in the case of a Marshall and A.J. Turner, and Ethan Payne, whomever else at Jordan Houston. You can feature them in ways that is best for you because the defense has to account for all the speed personnel on the outside. Now, they may say, well, we're going to load the box and you're going to have to throw the ball against us. So there are going to be games where you may throw it 50 times, whether it's Stone, whether it's Braylon, whomever's throwing the football, or if it's Pennington. You don't know going into a matchup who you're going to need on a given day. But the ability to window dress and say, look, if you don't cover, we're going to throw. But if you cover, we're going to run. That's why having a group up front that can work well together, but also understand that you got to be able to pass block as well as you run block, because we have 2 plays called at the same time with so many of these air raid systems RPO based. So if you hear one thing, okay, I got to flip my mind to run. Another way, I've got to be ready to block. If there's going to be a screen, I've got to get my angles. So simply presenting this offense in a number of different ways can confuse the defense, and that's why offenses can say that they're balanced. It's not we're going to run at 35, we're going to throw at 35. That's not what an offense means by being balanced. They need to show the ability to do anything and then do what they want to do instead of the defense dictating what they're going to do.
I think you made a good point.
Right, yeah.
My bad. That was one of the things that one of the questions for us going into the season was like, the offensive line, because we had so many new faces there. And, that's been like a real pleasant surprise for us, is that group's gelled really well and has allowed us to do those things that you're talking about. We've kept our quarterbacks upright, which has been great. We've been able to run the ball pretty effectively. We've had some big runs that have obviously inflated our numbers a little bit here and there, but I mean, it's just part of it. I mean, you'll have that from time to time. So, but that, like I said, that's been one of the biggest surprises for us, was just, how successful our offensive line's been with so many new pieces.
And so much of these modern passing offenses aren't the 10 yards and do an in or a deep post or the zero route, the fly. A lot of modern passing now is throw the ball at the line of scrimmage, get it out quickly, and whether it's a screen or whether it's just getting the ball out to make sure that your best athletes have a chance to run in space. Yards after catch is crazier now than it ever has been because of that. And at the same time, you're protecting your offensive line, even if you think that it's a group that has some experience. By getting the ball out quickly, naturally, you're going to give up fewer sacks. And by getting the ball in the hands of your best playmakers as quickly as possible, instead of having to wait that 3 second for a route combo to mix, or one crosser to go in front of the other, if they're in man, somebody to follow somebody, get the pick, and then get the opening somewhere. These offenses now, it's snap, throw, where playmakers can be themselves instead of having to find an opening 10 or 15 yards downfield.
Yeah, you're certainly right, Danny. And when you look at Marshall from an outsider's perspective, I mean, obviously, Stone Earl started the season. Braylon Braxton came in last week. There's two quarterbacks to prepare for. And I'm sure Georgia Southern defensively is thinking about that. They're also thinking about preparing for guys like A.J. Turner, Christian Fitzpatrick, and some of the other playmakers that Marshall has. What have you been hearing so far about what Marshall has offensively and preparing for those guys?
Well, in a way, I'm thinking if you don't start a guy that has 5 touchdowns the week before and is the rating offensive player of the week, you're probably crazy. But in another way, you've got to be ready for every possible scenario, with Stone being more of a passer that's a capable runner and Braylon being more of a runner that showed he can pass it and be efficient, going 8 for 14, hitting 7 different guys with 3 touchdowns. That's a pretty good line. So you need to be not only ready but wary of what Marshall's potential is, with A.J. Turner having 3 runs of 67 plus already this year, Fitzpatrick, that insane catch against Virginia Tech. It's the ability to make you think about what is possible, because even though that's not going to be the expectation every time a ball is thrown his way, but to make a play like that, Derwin Burgess is similar for Georgia Southern. There was a stretch a couple of years ago when he was getting used to this new scheme that he was making a highlight reel catch every week, and Fitzpatrick has presented that potential. Also, getting the tight end re-involved with Toby Payne. I know he hadn't scored in a couple of years, but the ability to give it to him against Western Michigan, okay, that's somebody you have to account for, because if you forget about him and you're just worried about the other 10 guys, that's somebody that can haul a pass in and then take it all the way. With Houston taking a pass 75 yards for a score, he had not done that in his career. And with the mayor, with Ethan Payne, the ability to do whatever an offense needs. I love the fact that he gets incorporated the way that he does. So, yeah, you got to be ready for pretty much everything with an offense like this.
We are
Danny,
streaming live on Facebook. Sorry, Josh.
go
We're
ahead.
streaming
Go
live
ahead.
on Facebook, YouTube, and X. If you got a question for all of us, comment below. Josh, go ahead.
Danny, one of the things that we're still talking about offense here. One of the things for Georgia Southern, it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, just looking through like stats and numbers and things like that. The way I read it, have they fumbled the ball 11 times as a team?
Yeah, and I'll do you one better. Not one of those fumbles has been by a running back.
Oh,
I mean, that was an insane number. I was like, surely I'm reading this wrong or it's a typo.
right.
All right, 5 of those are by J.C. French, and a couple of those have been why the Eagles have given up a couple sacks, because if there's a fumble, there's automatically a sack. That's just how the stats work. There's been a couple of muffed punts. There's been a couple of screen passes that have been fumbled. But, yeah, the crazy part of the 11 fumbles is not one of those is by a running back. But they've only lost 4 of them, and only 1 interception has allowed the Eagles to be +2 in turnovers, where a year ago they were -10, and it was their worst turnover season in more than a decade. So that's even more of a reason to show why there has been such an emphasis on, yes, getting to 30 points per game, which seems to be the benchmark of a lot of squads, but not giving the ball away so you can make the most out of those possessions. That's been such an emphasis.
Yeah, I mean that's that's what I was telling Aaron earlier. When like for us last week, we gave up some points, but I mean we had the pick six and we had the long touchdown by Houston. So whenever you get quick scores like that and you're giving other teams more possessions, obviously there's more chance for scores and points and yards and so on and so forth. But that was last year. I mean, my God, I mean we turned the ball over and it felt like. In like last year, it even felt like they came in like such key points in the game, and like it was just like
Mhm.
like backbreaking type situations. And I'm not going to like jinx anybody, so I'm not going to comment too awful much about the success that we've had this year with that or the improvements. But I'll leave it at that and just say that there's obviously been an uptick in our ability to protect the ball.
I'll agree with Coach Huff in his press conference saying that, look, if you can stay out of disadvantageous situations where you're not putting yourself behind the chains with false starts on first down, with penalties on third downs where you've got to force the football. That's where the turnovers happen. And that's what bit Georgia Southern down the stretch in those last 5 games last year. They were 6-2. They needed probably 2 wins to clinch an East title and play for the conference championship. But so many things just flatlined over the last month plus of the season. And the turnovers were a big reason why, where you'd have a penalty here, a penalty there, forcing a football here, not getting off the field on third down. Eagles were giving up 40 points a game down the stretch a year ago, and they ended up going to a bowl game, which was great, but then they got dominated by Ohio in Myrtle Beach, and it was, in a way, a merciful end to the season. But this year, limiting those false starts, they've still been in third and long a little bit too much, but what helped a week ago against Georgia State was that they kept them right around 4 to 6 yards per attempt, whereas the first 4 games, the average third down was about 8 yards per. And for a team that's converting about 45% the last 2+ years, which is an insane number for a team that passes as much as Georgia Southern has, that's been impressive. But if they can get it down to that 4 to 6 range, they're more than likely to stay on the field, not have to force the football. When they get to the red zone, score touchdowns. A year ago, just like Marshall, Georgia Southern was not very good at getting touchdowns in the red zone. Both were in the bottom 30 in the country in touchdown percentage in red zone possessions. But now, hanging on to the football, not giving it away, getting into the scoring area, and making sure the drives end with 6 and not 3, it's no secret why these teams have had an offensive resurgence.
You were talking about, you getting 6 instead of 3, but I'm going to comment on your kicking game. Your kicker looks like he's 7 for 8 and been pretty effective from longer ranges on top of that. I will say that for us, that I would have to say that you have the advantage there. I mean, our kicking game has had its highs and lows and been fairly inconsistent, unfortunately, but not just in the kicking game, but your kicking game as a total. I mean, your punting game too. I mean, I think he's averaging close to 43 yards a punt. So it looks like their kicking game as a whole is very strong.
Yeah, for Gavin Stewart kicking after coming over from Georgia Tech, his longest career field goal up in Atlanta was 40 yards, and already this year he's got field goals of 48 and 53. That was a bomb that he hit in Atlanta, ironically enough, against Georgia State. And Alex Smith, yeah, it's close to 43 yards per punt, but it's also 41.5 yards of net, which is among the national leaders. Eagles are not giving up much in the punt return game or the kickoff return game. DeAndre Buchanan is an All-American potential as a returner. He was as a freshman a year ago. He had that run back against App State. Could have had 2 or 3 others that have gone to the house. But so far, the special teams, Coach Helton and Coach Turner West, they've called it elite, and there's a lot of metrics that show that the Eagles are amongst the nation's best in all conceivable special teams. And having Gavin play as well as he has, going 7 for 8, and for Alex Smith, who at one point was a pro tennis player, to come in and be one of the nation's more effective punters, it has been an awesome turnaround to watch for that group.
Yeah, definitely. And to wrap it up here, Danny, I mean, obviously these two teams have had a lot of history. When you go back to their days in the Southern Conference, they've played twice already in the Sun Belt year since Marshall joined the Sun Belt in 2021. These have been spirited games, competitive games in both years. And these are two evenly matched teams like we discussed here in the open. So what do you think are 2 or 3 keys that you think will decide the game either way for either Georgia Southern or Marshall to help propel them in the Sun Belt East standings?
2 things that I thought about. Number one is tackling. Georgia Southern has improved mightily in tackling ever since that Boise State game, but as we've seen from Ashton Genty, he's going to break a lot of tackles against a lot of teams, so maybe that wasn't necessarily on Georgia Southern for being poor, but it was more Genty just being that good. But even so, Pro Football Focus had Georgia Southern missing only 1 tackle against Georgia State, and I know there's a couple of plays you could say, well, there's a play that could have been made, should have been made, but as far as the analytics go, they only had them for 1 missed tackle the entire game, which was a crazy thing to think about. So if they continue to trend in that direction, I think that their chances are better than average. And considering that A.J. Turner is a game breaker and there's a number of guys on Marshall's offensive personnel that can do similar, that's a huge point of emphasis. And talking with Steve earlier today about how much J.J. Roberts lives in the box and how good of a tackler he is. But the tackling from linebacking, whether it's Watson or whether it's Yates or really anybody else in the back portion, that's going to be really important. And I'm also thinking about how Georgia Southern is going to handle Mike Green. I have a feeling he's going to get his in some ways, but as long as the impact is minimal, and I'm not saying that means he can only get one sack, but he could have a better game by just being a constant disruptor and not have one sack, or he could have 3 sacks in a game that ends up being a convincing win one way or the other. If Georgia Southern can specifically game plan for him, know where 1-5 is, and not let him own the line of scrimmage, then the Eagles can execute their run game. They can execute their quick passing game and make sure that they're finishing drives the right way by converting the third downs that they present, and also by being able to just make sure that he is not the reason why Georgia Southern loses this game. To me, those are the two that they need to live in.
With Green, it's a situation where, basically what you said, teams, early on, going into the season, we kind of knew, you saw flashes of it last year, and you kind of knew, there was a chance this guy's going to be pretty good. But obviously, after just the first couple of games, teams have picked up on that. And, you have seen, it was one of the things against, Western Michigan. They were chipping him and doubling him and just doing so much, just to try to neutralize him, and that's what's important for the rest of those guys on the front to get some production. That's which a couple of those guys have made plays last week. CD, I think he had a sack or a half a sack last week, and then Takei's he's gotten healthy, and that's been a big plus for us because that guy's such a disruptor. In the middle, when you can put him in the middle and put Mike on the edge, that gives us 2 guys up front that can really make plays. So, but like you said, Mike can just influence the game even without a tackle, just because his presence is so key for us. And the guy is just a freak, to be honest. Some of the things that one sack that he had out there at Ohio State where he spun on the guy, it was like that guy. He just put him in the washing machine. It was awesome. But he's a special talent for sure.
Well, you need to figure out whether or not you want to run at him and just put him in the play, or if you want to run away from him and just have him chase things down. It's the lesser of two evils, because I think he's going to find a way to get his. But as long as on the ESPNU broadcast, if they're not circling him on every play and saying, look what he did here, then I think Georgia Southern's going to be all right. But if that's the case, then it's probably going to be a pretty good night for Marshall.
Should be an excellent game in the Sun Belt East, Paulson Stadium, the venue. Danny Reed will be on the call for Georgia Southern. Of course, Steve Cotton will be on the call for the Marshall Thundering Herd. Should be an excellent game. Should have big implications in the Sun Belt East moving forward. Big-time broadcast, whiteout in Statesboro, Paulson Stadium. Danny, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We certainly appreciate your time. Good luck with the call tomorrow or on Saturday, and good luck the rest of the way. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Guys, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, Danny. That was Danny Reed, the play-by-play voice of the Georgia Southern Eagles, here joining us in the Runnin' with the Herd podcast. Pretty good insight from him as it relates to Georgia Southern. I asked him the question, Josh. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the key to, or the 2 keys to, a Marshall victory on Saturday night?
I think protecting the ball is where it all starts. I think in any game, and I'd have to look at the numbers to know, and this is not just, this does not just solely relate to under Huff, but for any team, any coach, if their team can protect the ball and win the turnover battle, I think that immediately obviously gives you an edge. And, again, I'm not going to jinx us. I'm not going to comment too awful much on that, but I think that is a huge key to the game. any game, but
Mhm.
especially a game where like we've been talking, two teams are kind of like evenly matched, and Marshall does a few things better than they do, but Georgia Southern does a few things better than we do. So I think overall it's very evenly matched, and something like that could obviously turn the game, just from a momentum standpoint, or just opportunity standpoint. I mean, just like Jacorian's pick six on Saturday. I mean, that was a huge momentum swing, and I mean, like it felt like after that, like I was saying earlier, it never really felt like that game was in question after that again, and
Mhm.
it just felt like it was such a and it not just the momentum of the game, but I mean, like it felt like it really got under their team a little bit. Aguilar, I mean, he had some, he had the one penalty, all unsportsmanlike there on the sidelines, and a couple other guys. I mean, that was the one, that was the one thing that I took away from that game was, I mean, and I'm not trying to crap on anybody here, but I mean, like, dude, App State, I mean, they were a dirty, dirty team, and
Undisciplined,
I mean, yeah, I mean, they were just
dirty
running their
and
mouth, and
undisciplined.
yeah, very much so. I mean, that was, that's a very much a black eye for them, and that's, you know, give
And
our
that's
guys
not very
credit. I mean,
typical of an Appalachian, and that's not very typical of an Appalachian State team. Not, since we've been watching them. I mean,
right.
from a
And,
distance. I mean, that's just something we're not accustomed to seeing.
and like I said, give our guys credit. I mean, like, we had the one penalty there at the end that they were offsetting, but I mean, like, when, when a guy's sitting there punching you or slapping you in the face, I mean, like you're going to react to that. I mean, like it is what it is, and I mean, like,
Oh yeah,
I don't
our
really
guy
blame the
kept
guys
his
for that.
cool though.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
our
So
guy
yeah,
pretty much kept his cool. I mean, I forgot who was the guy that got punched. His name escapes me, but um,
Amir Foster.
he Amir Foster, yeah. And I'll tell you what, for a young guy, and Amir's a sophomore now, and he's been out there quite a bit. He's been tested quite a bit, as has Jacoby Henderson. And Jacoby had a pick last week, and Amir Foster's been in on a lot of plays. So for those two young guys, especially, I mean, you got to give your kudos to those two for being some young players who played a lot last year as freshmen, got tested, had some of their growing pains, I guess you could say, but they're kind of stepping up and kind of finding their way a little bit.
And that was really something that I thought would happen. I mean, like, we saw in preseason. I mean, there's some guys with some talent out there. I mean, like, everybody knew JJ was, pretty talented, and, um, you know, uh, with Moten, same way. I mean, he had some nice moments last year, and he's been. I mean, that is one thing. I wasn't sure how he would handle the move outside, from the nickel, but he's handled it very well. He's,
Mhm.
to be honest, teams aren't throwing the ball at him too awful much. Um,
No.
he's done a really good job, holding down one side of the field, and um, which gives us some ability to do some other things defensively. Um, and I think you saw that a couple times last week, because both interceptions were on Jacoby's side of the field. And I mean, like, Jacoby obviously made a nice play, and the ball was tipped on Jacorian's interception, but creating traffic and creating different looks on one side of the field when the other side of the field's somewhat on lockdown is a huge piece for our defense, especially when you got guys up front like like Mike and Takezi and the other guys that are able to pressure the quarterback like they have. So anyways, I kind of got off base on what we were talking about there, but nonetheless,
Mhm.
win the turnover battle. Um, Play a clean game. Penalties. I think we've done a pretty good job with that. We've we've limited those for the most part. One thing I will say, and it was just a very weird stat from last week, and we've got to get off the field in late down situations.
Yeah.
I mean, like, App State
Mhm.
was 6 for 6 last week on fourth down, and I mean, again, that's a weird situation and obviously very uncommon. But
Mhm.
I'm not sure what they were on third down. To be honest, I don't think their numbers were all that great. But nonetheless, those were 6 opportunities where you had a chance to get off the field, and we didn't do it. And
Mhm.
to be completely honest, I don't think I've ever watched a game that I've seen a team go 6 for 6 on 4th downs. I mean, like, that's just really just an insane statistic in itself. But like I said, I'll say that play a clean game, get off the field, on late down situations, and yeah, I think we've made some changes offensively. I mean, we've kind of found our groove a little bit. Like what Danny was saying in terms of like spreading the ball out or spreading the field out, I should say, and just kind of taking what the defense is giving us. And if you would have asked me at the beginning of the season, who would have the most carries through 5 games, and you would have told me Stone Earl, I would have told you you were a moron. But it is what it is, and I mean, like it just is what it is. But it's been effective, and it'll be interesting to see. And we're talking about the court. I don't know what the situation is with the quarterback. This week. I think Huff's got a tough decision to make. I mean, me personally, I try to not make too many knee-jerk reactions to things, and not just in this situation, but in life. But Stone won the job in camp, and through the first 4 games, he was your guy. But when you look at things, last week, I mean, obviously Braylon was very comfortable out there and very productive. So, I think it's one of those things. I don't really know that you can go wrong here, but nonetheless, I think it's a tough decision to make. Like who are you going to start, and how long of a leash do you give somebody if whoever starts has trouble. And anyways, like I said, I think, and this is something else I will say about those 2 guys is in the first 4 games, Braylon Braxton was the first guy out on the field congratulating the offense every time they come off the field. Last week,
yes, he was.
Stone Earl was the first guy out on the field congratulating the offense after every score. So I think that says a lot about those 2 guys individually, and what Coach Huff has done with the chemistry of the team, and just the environment that he's building there. So that shout out to those 2 guys. Even it doesn't seem like that's pretty much takes away any look of selfishness that may be there, or someone may think could be in place. So like I said, those were things that stood out to me, obviously through first 4 games and then last week, for those 2 guys. But
yeah, definitely. It says a lot about them as leaders and as men and as football players, to go out and congratulate, your offense after scoring. And I mean, hey, those 2 guys are in direct competition with each other. They were in direct competition with each other all fall camp. It basically came down to the last, pretty much before kickoff, who was going to start this season against Stony Brook. And both men have handled the job well. And I would say, Coach Huff has a very tough decision on his hands, but if he's a football historian, he could look at the 1997 Ohio State Buckeyes and how they won the Rose Bowl with 2 quarterbacks, Stanley Jackson and Joe Germain. I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave that out there and leave it for the world to ponder. But I would say my key to the game for Saturday is start out fast. Obviously, last year's game started out fast. Jaden Harrison, who's now at Notre Dame, started out the game 15 seconds in with a kickoff return for a touchdown. I'm not saying that's going to happen this Saturday, but if you start out fast, first time Marshall gets the ball, you drive it down the field and score. I mean, I think that would work wonders, especially on the road. Their crowd's going to be loud. Their crowd's going to be proud. And I think that if you start out fast and you kind of quell the momentum a little bit, good things will happen.
Agreed.
All right. And that about wraps it up for the Running with the Herd podcast, powered up by Herd Nation, part of the Rivals Network, sponsored by Mike Gwynn Insurance Agency. If you missed any of this podcast, the archive will continue to be up on YouTube. It'll also be posted in X as well as Facebook. A lot of the Facebook groups, a lot of the Sunbelt groups, Marshall fan groups will be getting it as well. And you'll also see it on the paid board and the free board of Herd Nation, as well as Old Fairfield. Special thanks to our guest, Danny Reed, for joining us. We certainly appreciate his time. And we'll talk to you again soon as we get ready for a short week and the Georgia State Panthers are coming to Huntington on Thursday. We'll talk to you then. But for right now, so long. For Josh Stowers, for Danny Reed, I'm Aaron Coleman saying so long. Thank you for viewing. Thank you, as always, for supporting this podcast. And as always, go Herd.